The primordial interest of the United States, over which for a century we have fought wars, the First, Second Cold War, has been the relationship between Germany and Russia, because united they are the only force that could threaten us, and to make sure that that doesn't happen.
If there were hundreds of British or American soldiers dying every single day in Ukraine, you'd have absolute outcry about it. But there's no outcry in Britain because they're Ukrainians. It doesn't really matter. This is mainly a proxy war now. So Ukrainian people are being used as cannon fodder for an American proxy war in Ukraine. And it's shocking. And so many people still in the West say, stand for Ukraine. Well, standing for Ukraine, continue to send them weapons, is literally sending them in to die. And I can't believe how there's not more people pushing for a peaceful negotiated settlement. There's poor people who are sent to these front lines, mainly. Forced to fight, sent to the front lines. The root is a civil war. Now it's become a proxy war. But it's a civil war between Ukrainian ultra-nationalists and its pro-Russian population, which are mainly in the east and the south. And if people in Europe, people in Britain realize that, they would realize there is a peace to be had and new borders to be drawn.
The other thing I would say is that the war didn't start in February last year. The war started in 2014, and since 2014, NATO allies have provided support to Ukraine with training, with equipment.
A miracle didn't happen, and European Union leaders and Ukraine have, as expected, failed to sign an historic free trade deal after a last-minute U-turn from Kiev.
We are smart enough and have enough common sense not to sign an agreement that aims to break our ties with Russia. We are one people, the Russian people.
There isn't any contradiction about Ukraine's course on the integration issue. Generally, this is not about the integration. This is about economical relations. We have made this pause on the association agreement to find an answer on what kind of conditions we can sign the free trade zone agreement.
And increasingly, there seem to be a group of radical nationalists who seek to take the fight, as they see it, for a national revolution directly to the parliament and to the police.
Some stuff. Yeah? Come on, guys. Are you hungry? You're welcome. There he is.
Thank you for coming here.
In the frank conversation between Newland and the US ambassador to Ukraine, the opinion is expressed that opposition leader Vitaly Klitschko needs to do more political homework and that the leader of choice is Arseniy Yatsenyuk. And then there's this comment about the EU.
So that would be great, I think, to help glue this thing and have the UN help glue it. And, you know, the EU.
She said F the European Union. And everybody said, oh my God, she said the word. What are they doing? The highest ranking State Department official, who presumably represents the Obama administration, and the American ambassador in Kiev are, to put it in blunt terms, plotting a coup d'etat against the elected president of Ukraine.
Alcune migliaia di persone hanno nuovamente manifestato anche in sostegno del presidente Yanukovych a poche centinaia di metri dalla più affollata piazza filoeuropea. Tra i manifestanti c'è chi teme che un accordo d'associazione con l'Unione Europea come quello appena congelato possa aggravare la crisi che colpisce soprattutto le regioni orientali dall'industria più antiquata.
They are some of the estimated 45% of Ukrainians who are against the protests in Euromaidan. We're here for a peaceful settlement of any conflict. The proof lies in our behavior and actions. We do not have helmets or bulletproof vests. Our hands are clean. We don't have guns or any sort of weapon. Since Ukraine's last major demonstration 2 weeks ago, radicals have dug in here. The core group is Pravy Sector, Right Sector. These are anti-Russian ultranationalists. On Monday, Right Sector leaders said they would keep the truce if the police free all the people they have detained before the end of this week.
Well, underlying all of the various issues are two fundamentally different understandings of Ukrainian identity and Ukrainian history. For one group, primarily located in the far western provinces, it is a matter of restoring Ukrainian identity as one that is distinct from and often anti-Russian, against Russian influence. So they insist on things like only speaking Ukrainian, mandating the use of Ukrainian throughout the country, and having a particular vision of Ukrainian history, which emphasizes what they call the liberation struggle during World War II, in which certain Ukrainian groups fought alongside the Nazis. In the East, they have a very different conception of Ukrainian identity, one that has much closer ties with Russia, is comfortable with those historical ties, with the use of the language, and they really see World War II as a national struggle against foreign invaders, namely the Nazis.
Victoria just recently returned from Kiev and has an update on the situation there, as well as the U.S. government position.
What began on November 24th as a protest against President Yanukovych's decision to pause on the route to Europe has become much deeper and bigger path that would bring Ukraine back to long-term political stability and economic growth.
America is with you. I am with you. And the destiny you seek lies in Europe.
Thanks to leaked phone calls, we know for a fact that the current Undersecretary of State, Victoria Nuland, personally handpicked the leaders of the new government to replace Yanukovych. You can hear the phone call in her own voice as she speaks with the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine about who is in and who is out in the new Ukrainian regime to make the whole thing stick.
We are watching history being made, but history of the worst kind. That's what I'm telling my grandchildren. Watch this. So we have clearly the possibility of a civil war. And the longer-term outcome may be, and I want to emphasize this because nobody in the United States seems to want to pay attention to it, the outcome may be the construction, the emergence of a new Cold War divide between West and East, not this time, as it was for our generation, in faraway Berlin, but right on the borders of Russia, right through the heart of Slavic civilization. And if that happens, if that's the new Cold War divide, it's permanent instability and permanent potential for real war for decades to come. That's what's at stake. One last point. Also something that nobody in this country wants to talk about. The Western authorities, who bear some responsibility for what's happened, and who therefore also have blood on their hands, are taking no responsibility.
I have today had many of your people saying thank you to the European Union, but we don't deserve your gratitude. We have to thank you because you are defending European values and European principles.
But it was the European Union, backed by Washington, that said in November to the democratically elected president of a profoundly divided country, Ukraine, you must choose between Europe and Russia. That was an ultimatum to Yanukovych.
Start with sanctions against the regime in Ukraine. Also with the European Union to prepare a positive package for the Ukrainian people, a financial package and also a visa-free regime for ordinary citizens in Ukraine.
And I just heard from a senior politician here in Kiev that the new government does intend to sign the association agreement with the EU, which, as you may remember, is how this crisis started in the first place.
In Crimea itself, the Russian forces are consolidating their grip with the support of a largely friendly local population.
As many as 20,000 Russian soldiers have been on the move across Crimea in the past 24 hours, and they've taken over without firing a shot. Though there are small pockets of resistance, like those two bases where the Ukrainian soldiers still loyal to the government in Kiev have barricaded themselves in. But many Ukrainian security forces have switched sides, including the head of the Navy here, Denis Berezovsky, who was only appointed by Kiev yesterday. And today he announced, in essence, he would join the Russians.
By and large, they have been welcomed by the Russian-speaking population of Crimea.
There is not this kind of a crisis in terms of the way that the Russian-speaking people are in some way being harmed. And so this is all made up. And I think it's part of a much longer-term plan that Putin has had, which is to try to recreate some form of relationship between Ukraine and Moscow. I think that is the tragedy that's going on. Putin is, in many ways, I think, delusional about this. I agree with what Angela Merkel said.
As many as 95.5% of the electorate in Crimea have voted to join Russia. Nobody can take away our victory.
Ура! Поздравляю вас всех!
The interim government in Ukraine is currently negotiating a $15 billion IMF bailout package.
The government has to pay the IMF loan by privatizing whatever remains of the public domain. The Westerners want to buy the Ukrainian farmland. They want to buy the public utilities. They want to buy the roads. They want to buy the ports. And all of this is going to be sold at a very low price.
With violence growing in eastern Ukraine between pro-Russia residents and those who favor the government in Kiev, Ukraine's president has announced a major crackdown. Speaking on television, Oleksandr Turchinov said the government is launching, quote, a large-scale anti-terrorist operation. His announcement comes after protesters have taken control of a number of government buildings in the region.
Today was the day Kiev sent in troops to try to wrest back control of the east. But it didn't go well. Crowds of angry locals surrounded the soldiers and their armoured vehicles. A warning shot fired into the air failed to disperse the protesters just outside the town of Kramatorsk. I spoke to some of the government soldiers. They told me they'd been surrounded by local residents first. Then they said armed men had arrived, taken over their vehicles and driven them to Slavyansk.
They refused to shoot on us. Some have come over to our side. They've volunteered to join our forces. The rest have been given some food and money and are going home.
Today we agreed on a package of further military measures to reinforce our collective defense.
I don't think it's quite fair to characterize them as secessionists, because secession is really a last resort for them. Their demands are for a transfer of more power to the regions. And only if the government in Kiev refuses that do they want to hold a referendum for independence and then ultimately perhaps joining Russia. But that's not their first objective. The government in Kiev, instead of just outright rejecting the idea of local referendums, could actually get ahead of the issue by embracing it and framing it in terms that it would like to see. It seems to me the main complaint of people in the East is that they're not having a voice now in politics. Their political party, which was the Party of Regions, is in disarray.
Après avoir découvert le massacre d'Odessa.
J'ai été très surprise de découvrir que 40 personnes avaient brûlé sous la complicité, il me semble, et ça a été vérifié, de la police du nouveau gouvernement de Poroshenko. Brûlé, s'était jeté à travers des fenêtres, etc. Et ces images m'avaient beaucoup étonnée parce qu'elles étaient très éloignées de ce que l'on me donnait à voir et à entendre du conflit dans les médias français.
Se non è guerra civile, le somiglia molto da vicino. Odessa e Slaviansk sono i teatri degli scontri tra...
Parliament has already passed some 18 separate pieces of required legislation in advance of the Eastern Partnership Summit in Vilnius. Although that was a missed opportunity, it would be a huge shame to see 5 years' worth of work and preparation go to waste if the AA is not signed in the near future. So it is time to finish the job.
In precedenza c'erano stati degli scontri tra le opposte fazioni. Filorussi e filogovernativi si rimpallano le accuse. I primi affermano che siano stati gli estremisti filonazisti di Pravi Sector, assieme a ultracalcistici, a dare il là alle violenze.
The Western authorities, who bear some responsibility for what's happened, and who therefore also have blood on their hands, are taking no responsibility. The outcome may be the construction, the emergence of a new Cold War divide between West and East.
2014, Ukraine didn't have any problems with, didn't have a civil war, respected its minority groups. There were 20% of pro-Russians or Russian ethnics, Russian speakers in Ukraine. But since when 2014 happened, a hard nationalist Ukrainian government took power, and the first thing they did was ban stop Russian being a state language. You then had Russian people starting to protest around Ukraine, famously in Odessa, where peaceful protesters took to the streets. They were chased by nationalist mobs and burned to death in the trade union building. So then you got people in east of Ukraine looking at this and thinking, oh, this is a problem.
These are supporters of the newly formed People's Republic of Donetsk. Donetsk city sits at the center of a vast province in eastern Ukraine that borders Russia. Recently, a ragtag group of pro-Russia renegades declared it separate from the rest of the country, a move the interim government in Kiev swiftly condemned.